Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are more than honored to be sitting down with David Morgan, the founder of the Morgan Report. Thank you so much for joining us today, David.
Well, Justin, thanks for having me.
If there were any doubts before, I think that those have been put to rest. It seems that silver may very well be one of the most undervalued assets on the planet at this point. As inflation creeps into the popular vernacular in the United States, as when people go to stores, maybe they're experiencing shortages in their products. Personally, spring water, meat, I've never experienced that in my life where I go to a store and I don't have that selection that the United States has been known for throughout its existence, particularly in the consumerist era post-World War II. So I'm curious, David, what are you seeing in the trenches of the silver market?
Well, again, Justin, thanks for asking for the interview. I'm going to ask you what I will answer your question about what I see in the silver market. Before we get there, I kind of want to backtrack with how you open, and that's about food. I've been warning about food on my weekly podcast, what I call the Weekly Perspective, for a very long time. Also, in many of my interviews that I know you follow me fairly closely, I've mentioned that over time, which we're now there and continuing, there will be situations where you had, let's say, 6 choices of, let's say, a spaghetti sauce. And all of a sudden, you're down and there's only 2 manufacturers. It may get down to where there's only 1. So we are contracting in the physical economy, which is separate from the financial markets. And as I've said in the past, there used to be a fairly strong correlation between the financial markets and the physical economy. That separated long ago. The financial markets, in my studied view, are in fantasy land, and the physical economy is what it is. So shortages of semiconductors causing, problems in the auto sector, problems with shipping causing problems stocking shelves, and on it goes. So back to your question, what do I see currently in the silver market? Tightness in the market more than you would think from the current price action, especially the sell-off that we've seen the last several days. But I see a lot of good, and I want to take it from this perspective, which is more of a longer term safety of capital perspective, which means that in the longer run, silver's, recently, meaning over the last several months, gotten to an 8-year high. Now it's backed off from that, but we're pushing near 30 at the beginning of this year. Now we're down in about the 24 level. And that's upsetting, especially to people and many of the Wall Street silver community that were buying at 28, 28, 28. And the premiums were extremely high. So they're paying anywhere from, I don't know, I'm going to make it up, but I'm roughly correct, 32, 33, 34, maybe 35 an ounce. And now we're down, from there to the wholesale price of roughly 24. So I get it. And it doesn't make sense, but it does from the reality of how these markets are moved, what controls the markets, and what the paper paradigm can do. So where is silver? Well, it's undervalued, as you said, probably the most undervalued asset. It's in the past proven to be the best asset to hold and own during a highly inflationary environment. And we're creeping into that right now in the United States and other places. And, people tend to get interviews like yours, and it's not you, Justin, it's interviews in North America, into this mindset of we are the market. Now, North America sells the most silver coins of any market. However, it's a global market. So if you were in Argentina or Venezuela or one of these areas that's experienced high inflation and food shortages, and you own silver, the conversation would have a whole different tone to it. It would be, I'm so grateful I have silver. I've been able to buy foods or foodstuffs that maybe no one else could buy because I was able to trade with silver rather than with the local currency or whatever. So, we need to kind of widen our horizon as far as thinking about these metals from the context of only how many pieces of paper is it worth, or when it gets to be worth these many pieces of paper, what can I do with it, to a more broad situation of, what's the true value of, things in life. And of course, food and energy are key. And if you have the ability to pay for something in silver that someone else may not, especially in other countries, and it could happen here, that will take on, let's say, added value because it's more coveted as a store of value, means of exchange or accounting of what is real and what is not. So it's probably a long answer, but I wanted to put it in the context that maybe we should broaden our thinking a bit about, instead of, exactly what is the paper price and who it hurts, and just focusing on that and that alone to widen your vision a bit.
The Bitcoin industry in which I work and spend most of my time has the same exact issue. They just are obsessed with, quote, number go up. That's what they are. That's basically what they're selling, which I think has diminished the Austrian basis of Bitcoin from where it comes. If you read Satoshi's earliest writings, like in the Genesis block, rather, in the code itself, he references the bailouts. We see now post-COVID that we're in, essentially, we're post-Keynesian. We're now in a monetarist society. So our governments are not concerned about the debt ceiling. Of course, we're coming up against the debt ceiling once more in October. It'll be raised most likely until the point that it's not quite sure if we're there yet. And so this, I think, does push us towards having to broaden our view of all of these assets. Simply having them is a choice that we make to take our money elsewhere. And it may come further down the line, probably quicker, maybe in certain parts of the country than in others, where you're able to go and exchange your silver for food or energy or your Bitcoin. And I think that I purchased GoldSilverBitcoin.com in 2012 kind of with this vision in mind, that it's our choice. That's the tagline I picked, that it's our choice to either kind of exist in these financial markets or choose alternatives and create alternatives in the case of Bitcoin. But of course, now there is this gold versus Bitcoin mentality, which I think we need to move beyond as well. First of all, it's nonsense. The axiom from which a gold versus Bitcoin debate would begin mischaracterizes both of these assets in terms of what they are seeking to achieve. In Bitcoin's case, of course, it was an alternative based on some of the early writings and the early adherents or hodlers in Bitcoin as an alternative to central banks and modern monetarism as we're seeing today. Silver too, there's a lot of overlap there. I came to Bitcoin from the gold and silver industry. I worked in a shop, and essentially probably as early as 2010 or 2011, there was weekly conversations about Bitcoin. Now, there's a lot of skepticism about Bitcoin for many reasons, many of which were valid, some of which maybe a misunderstanding, but I think from a broader picture, very valid. And that's my point. Now, gold versus Bitcoin is a misnomer. Really, they're just part of the same basket, in my opinion, in many ways. So Bitcoin's shortcomings may very well be experienced should we have infrastructural issues in the US, for instance. You might not always have the internet to access. And if that's the case, then it's going to be much more difficult for you to convince somebody to accept your Bitcoin. It's going to be much more difficult to access your Bitcoin. Now we might have like mesh networks, et cetera, in which transactions could take place, but how many people are going to have the knowledge to access those networks? In fact, I bet most of the people holding Bitcoin will be holding their Bitcoin on exchanges, which they won't have any access to. Perhaps silver is a completely different story. It could be theoretically seen as an insurance to one's Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin scene doesn't see that because they don't see the bigger picture and they're not discussing this bigger picture. They're not broadening their mindset. And I think that if we did that, we would see the thesis for a crypto Bitcoin. I don't want to go into crypto. Bitcoin and kind of precious metals portfolio will be more clearly seen. And of course, people might want to have 80% in metals and 20% in Bitcoin or none, or vice versa. However, this gold versus Bitcoin, I think, is a debate which misses how dire of a situation we could find ourselves in economically in the next 10 years. Thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but you were pretty consistent with what you said. First of all, I'm free market, so You can do whatever you feel is right for you. But as you outlined, Justin, first of all, what are the similarities? And this is my opinion. So, David says what I think. I'm sort of talking off the cuff, although I've given thought to the metals most of my life and Bitcoin certainly for quite some time. So they're both outside the system. So that's something that's the biggest similarity. It's something that's not really under the banking control. And in the case of the precious metals, they've been known as monetary instruments for thousands of years. Bitcoin, of course, is new. Bitcoin has advantages from portability. I mean, it's a lot easier to take $1 billion in Bitcoin anywhere in the world than it is that much physical gold. I do think that there shouldn't be a war between them. You can't, in my opinion, it's not a Bitcoin or gold. It's a gold and what else? I think that Bitcoin being the leader, the first off the early paper, which I'm glad you referred to, what the overall achievement was. And Bitcoin, to me, much more so than gold. And some of my followers may be upset, but as you know, Justin, I speak my mind. I'm not here to win a popularity contest. Bitcoin has reflected the MMT, which I'll shout out to one of the greats, Jimmy Rogers, modern money theory, and he calls it more money today, which is a more accurate phraseology. So as we see this continuing disregard for this modern money theory, which is proven again and again and again to not work, well, this time it's different and it's going to work. And so far it's kind of working. And you see that reflected in the price of Bitcoin. And this, of course, is what many that may or may not understand the philosophy behind it and are seeking price appreciation may participate in. And you don't have to know any asset, to invest in it. And, sometimes, I got to digress for just a moment, Justin, but I had a friend that got the symbol wrong on a certain stock by one letter. And so they invested in, a different company than they thought they were buying. And that it just took off. And the one that was recommended was sitting there doing nothing. So kind of blind luck. So I digress to come back. The point is that you can invest on a rumor or a hunch or the chat room or whatever and do quite well, or do the same thing. And you can study your brains out and make a mistake investing. So, but I got off track. My point is, I think you can own both. I think what the balance is determined by you. I think if you're really young and aggressive, you could favor more of the electronic version. I am old school and I'm more comfortable. I don't need to lose anything at my age. I rather have the stability of, like you outlined, maybe an 80-20 or 80-90-10 because of me. That's what's right for me. But what is right for me isn't right for Justin. And this is where you have to use your thinking. But I think having all your eggs in one basket is something that's simply a bad choice. I also think that to not have anything outside of the conventional financial system is even a bigger mistake. So in other words, if you don't own something outside the system, like some type of crypto, gold or silver, or maybe let's say a pile of plywood that's protected as an extension of that idea, but something that is of value, preferably something that's of value to multiple millions of people outside of the system, there could be a price to pay. I think there will be a price to pay, and I think it's coming sooner than later.
Younger people maybe should reconsider that, being so comfortable with the electronic versions of cash as Bitcoin was set out to be, and really get familiar with what's old. You mentioned precious metals is old school. Precious metals is like really old school. And I don't think that we're going to overthrow thousands of years of episteme or concept in regards to precious metals as money in such a short time with something like Bitcoin or ever. Now, you mentioned broadening kind of the discussion. Like, what does that really mean to you at the root of everything that we're watching today? I'm curious about, let's just leave it there. Like, what do you really mean, like in broadening our perspectives?
Well, I think if we go back to, I mean, I want to get too philosophical, and I love that, but I go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, basically, you got to eat, you got to have shelter, you need energy, and if you go at that rudimentary level, and you look at money from that rudimentary level, you need a means of exchange that's trusted by everybody without any question whatsoever at all. How do you achieve that? Well, history has taught us that that's physical pieces of metal that's valuable because it's precious. It's not very abundant, and it's recognizable, fungible, divisible, and trusted. So, I mean, it's really that rudimentary, and I don't, want to get too far down in the weeds, but I think it's a good place to build the foundation, because if you look at, what we're talking about, and I believe I've answered your question, because you said, go low, go deep, go wide, and tell us what the base is, and that's the base.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of precious metals throughout your life, and like what you've learned about it? What are the significant events over that time period? And what's the state of precious metals in a historical context today?
Wow, that's a mouthful. Okay, I'll give it a shot. So from my perspective, walking in my shoes, and the only one that's done that is me. But so the history of precious metals for me was that I was 11 years old when the coinage changed from 90% silver to what I call Johnson slugs. I noted that it kind of bothered me, but I didn't know if I should be bothered. I watched the adults around me, and no one seemed to really pay much attention to it. As I got a little bit older, I realized that people that in those days, there were a lot of vending machines, and those vending machines were mechanical in almost all cases, where you put in, coins, and you pulled something, or you pushed something, and you got your candy bar, your cigarettes, or Coca-Cola, or whatever was in the vending machine. And the vending machine industry was very savvy. These are business people, and they scarfed up every piece of silver coins that they possibly could, because most people were unaware of the changeover, if it meant anything or not. So silver was, proving Gresham's law that, good money is hoarded, saved, coveted, and that the lesser alternative that's worth less is used in circulation. So that's part of my story. Moving on, being fascinated by money and finance, I got into the silver markets through newsletter writers that I subscribed to, and bought, mining shares and physical metal. And I even got in futures markets pretty early in my life. And I remember getting into the gold market at a relatively pivot point below 300, and watching it go up to 850 on my birthday. And so I was making more money per day in the futures market than I was making per month on my job. And I mean, that's pretty exciting. It's like someone that bought Bitcoin at the correct time, and all of a sudden you see your Bitcoin account is worth more, in a week than maybe you make in a month or 6 months. And it was that kind of euphoria for me. I wasn't savvy enough to really appreciate what was happening. I didn't expect that it was normal market movement or anything like that. I was very aware that it was not. And I didn't cash out at the top, but I got out pretty close. So once gold hit the $700 level, I cashed out. And then I really was aware of what silver had done relative to what gold had done. And so I started a really deep dive on why, and everything was talking about the Hunt brothers. It was hunt, 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 hunt. And so that gave me the impetus to go deeply into the silver market and study why the Hunts chose silver over gold. And they really didn't. They owned both, but there's certain reasons. And so I started to look at, geez, and being a bit greedy in those days, not really balanced about the money question for myself personally. I thought, gosh, as much money as I made in gold, if I would have been in silver, I would have done this, So I looked at silver and I became pretty fascinated with it. And then I started to, during that inquisitive stage, which has really never ended for me personally, looking at the silver guys. And of course, I discovered Harry Brown and Jerome Smith, and some of the others, James Sibbett, and most of these names are probably foreign to your viewers, Justin, but these are people that wrote not exclusively on silver, but more about silver than some of the other alternative investment ideas. And that time was, snail mail, hard copy newsletters you received once a month that were in, paper form. I mean, the internet wasn't invented back in those days. So fast forward after that kind of euphoria, and then silver after the Hunt brothers took a dive, and I thought, well, how low could it go? And I just became kind of fascinated with what silver is just monetarily, but also industrially, and started looking at the Silver Institute and started a web page, which became a website, started getting inquiries of my expertise, and then started fulfilling the demand for someone that would fill kind of the void at that time of the silver industry from an investing perspective. So I started my first website, silver-investor.com, had a very large following, and I hope this is taken in context, sort of had that rock star status for a while when silver was the best investment asset or class you could hold for a few years. And gold was a close second. And some years gold did better than silver. You got to remember, and I know you know this, Justin, but for your viewers that may be hearing this story or me for the first time, from 2000, 2011, gold was in an 11-year bull market. So every year you bought gold, it was higher the next year. And then you bought it that year, and it was higher the next year. And you bought it that year, it was higher the next year. So, that momentum was very wonderful for precious metals investors. And of course, I got to participate in that. But then I knew all markets, no tree grows to the sky, nothing goes to the moon. There would be a correction. I actually called the top, said, this is it, take some profits, hedge, do whatever, but this is it. And thinking back, and I have still, I thought, when I first started, I thought it'd be about a 10-year market, because that's what I participated in primarily when I was much younger. I saw silver go from basically 1970 to 1980. And, Nixon closed the gold window in 71. And I think we Americans were allowed to buy gold. I think it was in 73. And so anyway, I watched that whole thing. I thought, 10 years might be about it. 2000, 2010, went to 2011. And I did call the top, but I didn't say this is the end. And the reason I didn't say this is the end, although it looked like it for a while, is that I knew gold had not really accounted for all of the malfeasance in the financial markets by the bankers. That if it had to be at least 2,500 the ounce, and it wasn't. It was sitting there, at a nice hefty number, pretty close to that. Silver had only reached its nominal high, and for silver to reflect all of the misallocation of capital in the currency markets, it would have to be about triple what it was in 1980. So from that study perspective, I thought there's more to come. But since then, it hasn't been a rock star status. It's been throw tomatoes at the guy. I wish I never listened to him, and some of that not. More people that are more cognizant of financial markets in general, that you need to be diversified. As I said in the 10 rules of silver investing, rule number 10, too much of a good thing is too much of a good thing. I recommend 10 and then later change it to 20%. And so, my head and heart have been pretty solid the whole way through. From my perspective, I've tried to shoot straight, help people as much as possible, give them the idea you need to have this. It's a must have, but it's not an all or nothing. If you have everything in the precious metals and you're comfortable with that, then don't complain to me or anyone else that says 10 or 20% is probably best for most people. Sure, there's different allocations that fit other people best. If you look at the very wealthy, most of them hold gold. They just don't talk about it. Just like the banks. The banks have been net buyers of gold since the financial crisis, and yet they kind of, in the mainstream financial press and talk shows and TV shows, or even in some of the mainstream financial outlets like Forbes or Wall Street Journal, they're pretty neutral to slightly negative on it, even though they keep buying it.
Could you discuss the period from about 2000 to 2011 and the reasons for that revaluation in some ways of the silver market? Do you have any thoughts on that? On like what the, why that 11-year bull run took place?
Well, I certainly wouldn't attribute it to me, but I would say I might have had a slight bit to do with it because the fundamentals were so incredibly bullish. I mean, we were in a deficit of silver from 1990 to 2006. So we were taking the above ground stockpile from 1.5 billion ounces above ground down, and we ate up 1 billion ounces. So that pile of precious metal that was so precious, from an industrial perspective, far more valuable or far more precious than gold, because silver is absolute required, essential, irreplaceable metal for anything electrical, electronic, digitized, like an iPhone or iPad or flat screen TV or whatever. So we're watching this precious metal being eaten and eaten away, and those fundamentals were irrefutable. So me and many others, I was one of the first, Ted Butler, Mike Maloney, and since then, I mean, Chris Dwayne, so many people have come on board the silver story and talked about it. But from the start, I was one of the first, if not the first, especially the first from, get out and talk to retail investors about it. So there was kind of an aha moment for many in the early days of the resource sector or investing circuit that I was on both. Most of it was resource or, resource stock investing primarily, but I hit many, the money shows are more mainstream. The money show was very good to me. They usually had me on their network, and going back, Karen Gibbs, some of the more noted people like Lou Dobbs. I never got interviewed by Lou, but the same station a couple times, national TV a few times, telling a silver story. So there was a big wake up to silver as an investment during that time frame, and it kind of built on itself. And then when it peaked, it peaked. And the older that the silver story becomes, the less the younger people, from my viewpoint, are interested in it, because you have the cryptos, the Bitcoins, you have other alternatives, and silver just seems like, too old school, or too, it's so much easier to use your iPhone to pay at Starbucks with your Starbucks app than, who would want silver when, it takes space in my wallet, or in my pocket or in my purse or something. So there's that. And I think that's kind of, in my view, maybe it's somewhat deliberate. I don't want to sound, too conspiratorial. I've already got that tag too many times. But the facts remain that we're being pushed into a cashless system, being pushed into an electronic form of money only. We're being pushed, subtly or not, into this idea that the bankers know more than we do. It's too complicated. I don't care. As long as I've got my phone with me, I can get anything I want and everything's wonderful. And that works until it doesn't. And it's not working now, as you outlined earlier, about what the food situation looks like, and that you just can't count on things that you used to take for granted.
What role do you see geopolitics playing in the precious metals market, either from that period, from 2000 to 2011 or today, if any?
Well, there's very few that are willing, from the top tier level, meaning geopolitically, to even mention the word silver. But if you know who I know, or would know, that there are certain nation states that are well aware of its strategic capabilities. I mean, I don't like to say this, but it's true, so I won't dismiss a fact. Silver is a metal of war. Without silver, you're not going to have a very good armament. So strategically, it's far superior to gold. And there are people at very high levels that are aware of this. In fact, going back, say, if I could say this in a general way, there was a time over a decade ago where there was a well-known think tank that was looking at silver strategically and made that basic statement that if you were going to stockpile anything for strategic capabilities, it would be silver. Really, if you go back and study it, of course, it's my passion, as you know, Justin, that silver used to be in what was called the strategic stockpile. And then some of these Congress critter and senator types decided, well, it was sitting there doing nothing, and let's get rid of this stuff. So they started the Liberty Silver Program, commonly known as Silver Eagles, and basically sold out or used that silver and sent it to the mint and started minting it and selling it to investors. And what was so funny, looking back, was that the edict, when it was written, demanded that only domestic silver be used in the production of the Silver Liberty, which was a joke because someone like me, of course, they'd never talked to someone outside of their think tank, but regardless, they would have realized that there isn't enough domestically mined silver to keep up even with that program, which is at that time, 10 million ounces a year was about it, then 20, then 30, then 40, as we've seen the last, some of the better years where more and more people are buying silver. But they had to change their law and say, no, you don't have to have just domestic silver. You can get it from anywhere to keep the coinage program intact.
You mentioned that you were only 11 years old when when the US coinage was debased of its silver content. And you were aware enough at that point to kind of wonder if that was a good thing. At that time, LBJ, who signed the act, the Coinage Act, stated during his discussion that, quote, if anybody has any idea of hoarding our silver coins, let me say this. Treasury has a lot of silver on hand, and it can be and will be used to keep the price of silver in line with its value in our present silver coin. There will be no profit in holding them out of circulation for the value of their silver content. Today, what is a silver dime worth? About $1.50 approximately, and it's been
no more than that. I just bought 100 ounces.
Oh, that's right, because like the
$100 worth. So
the,
I'll just show you. It's
the premiums for those, and I forgot this tidbit. They essentially have divorced silver physical from the market.
Yeah, so there's $100 in dimes, so 1,000 dimes right there. It's fairly heavy. I wouldn't want this carried around with me to pay my bills, but in fiat it was 2,500. So each dime is worth 250 is what I paid. Now there's a markup because the premium has been so high, but just so you know, round numbers, each dime is worth 250 in fiat.
And shout out to SD Bullion, of course.
Right.
Now,
yeah.
Now, do you have any gut reactions to LBJ's statement during that
Well, I
speech?
just like the man for a variety of reasons, and it's not just silver. But I won't go there. But yeah, my reaction is that politicians very seldom tell the truth, and if they do, usually it's couched in a way that's a partial truth. The truth of Nixon closed the gold window was that the U.S. system under Bretton Woods had cheated, lied to the world, and basically printed a lot more paper than there was gold to back it up. And they were called on their lie a couple of times, and they ended the whole thing. But when Nixon made a speech of temporarily closing the gold window, we blamed on the nasty speculators. And that's exactly what will happen again, probably in the silver and gold markets, probably in the silver market, that those rotten speculators were ruining the silver market for all of us that can't get a new iPhone because there isn't enough silver to make the new iPhone. And so sorry that Apple had to close their doors and discontinue business. Now, I am exaggerating, but you get the idea.
But of course, only speculators under a certain amount of wealth and below will be the ones blamed. Okay, you mentioned you mentioned it. Like, can you tell us about like the prospects in for gold and the law, namely gold ownership and the law? So of course, in 1933, Roosevelt made a speech in which he stated, quote, by virtue of the authority vested in me by Section 5 of the Act of October 6, as amended by Section 2 of the Act of March 9th, 1933, entitled An Act to Provide Relief in the Existing National and Emergency in Banking and for Other Purposes, in which a mandatory act Congress declared that a serious emergency exists. I, Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the USA, do declare that said national emergency still continue. Who wrote this? Definitely a lawyer. Still continues to exist, and pursuant to said section, do hereby prohibit the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States by individuals, partnerships, associations, and corporations, and hereby prescribe the following regulations for carrying out the purposes of this order. No more than a $10,000 fine and up to 10 years in jail. What are your thoughts on that, especially in the context of today?
Well, I mean, we hear the word gold confiscation continually, but if I was put in court and asked to, do an overview and then take the stand, I mean, it wasn't really confiscated. If you look up the word legally, what it was nationalized. They put out that order under FDR, and he said basically, step up or face these penalties. And if you step up, we're going to pay you for that gold. And we're going to pay you as the fine price at the time which is $20.67 an ounce. So you turn in an ounce of gold, you got your $20 bill, and away you go. And after as much that could be was turned in, and believe me, a lot wasn't, people kept their mouths shut, stuck it in a coffee can, buried it, outside in their backyard, kept their mouths shut. But regardless of that digression, people turned in their gold, and then we were under a gold standard, basically. So it was a different animal than we have today. So people did it, they didn't like it, some kept their gold and had the taking the chance that they could get a fine or jail or both. And away we went. Today, when you have a gold coin minted by the United States government, that's a legal tender. So you really would have to they'd have to break the law. The US government would have to break their own law to confiscate, or I'll say nationalize, gold again. They're not going to come to your door and say, give me your 4 ounces of gold, and I just don't see it happening. I think if you're worried about it, the main thing to do is participate in the coinage of your jurisdiction. So if you're a Canadian, have gold maple leaves. If you're US, have gold eagles, that type of thing. But I don't really see that being a problem for people in general. Now, it's a big if, I don't think it would happen, the governments or government somewhere decided that they wanted to confiscate, I'll put that in quotation marks, gold or silver, which I really doubt, but either one, they'd go where it is, I'm laughing at my own joke, but I mean, it would be the ETFs, and the banks own the ETFs. I mean, investors own them, but it's resting in, bank vaults. So that's where they would get it. And they would just say something along the lines of, like you just read, there may be some legal mumbo jumbo that it's ours, not yours. It's for the greater good. We made that decision for you. You don't get a vote. Tough luck, better luck next time type of thing.
How about silver in the popular culture? What's your experience of silver in the popular culture been? For me, for instance, I remember the movie Looper, in which silver, I think, was kind of used as a currency. Then there's also Disney used to produce silver coins with their characters on them. Baseball trading card companies used to create baseball cards with even as much as a gram of silver in them, I believe. And that's cool. I don't find that kind of product too much these days, although I forget the country which is doing it. They're producing really cool, interesting silver coins through the Perth Mint with a lot of interesting pop culture references. But I'm curious, could you speak to silver in the popular mind, silver in the popular culture over your lifetime?
Oh, it's waning. It's becoming less and less noted by the younger generation. Gold, I would say, is far more popular, and even that's waning as well. So the idea of hard money, honest money. I mean, the things that involved me from that 11-year-old time frame to present day have diminished greatly over the last decade or so. And, gold, silver, Bitcoin, as you talked about, what you're doing. I mean, once the alternative became electronic, that's carried far more weight with the younger generation than anything in the physical realm has. It will resurge in my view. I think the real breakthrough will be the melding of the two, and that's a cryptocurrency backed by precious metals, where you can move it cross border with your phone and still have $1 billion in gold and silver wealth, but it's all digitized. But when you get to, let's say, a location of your choice and you want the physical reality, you can convert it. So I think that's the best of both worlds. I think that in the longer view, a lot of these fiat only cryptos will go away. As you know, Justin, one of my most favorite, terms is all fiat fails, 3 words. So I think some of the all fiat fails type of cryptos will go away. I think those that are asset backed or have a unique capability, like maybe Theta, which I'll divulge I'm an owner of, so I'm biased. But uniqueness of what that particular crypto does and brings to the marketplace, they're not going away. I mean, the free market idea is very sound. The marketplace is a great determiner of what's worthwhile and what isn't. And so since gold and silver have been worthwhile, especially silver from a practical perspective and what it can do, that's not going away. Now, whether young people recognize it or not and are willing to invest in it, I think will be determined in the future. And I don't know the future. My hunch is that once there's more ability to own it in the crypto space, and then there is the ability that what's taking place with Wall Street Silver and perhaps others in the future of what the unbelievable opportunity is, that there will be a rush to silver and gold, but primarily silver, I believe, because it's so undervalued and it's so accessible, or will be more accessible through the blockchain format. So I'm still bullish, and maybe I'm, getting too old and too gray and whatever to give up. But my basic thesis isn't silver, it isn't gold, is to teach and empower people to understand the benefits of an honest financial system. If we're all able to play on a level playing field and not cheat on each other or chisel off each other or make our living just by sitting at some desk and looking at playing a video game with currency swaps, we might have a better future for everybody involved.
What was silver? How popular was silver in earlier times?
Yeah, when, I tried to outline it the best I could, but thanks for bringing it up again. I mean, sort of to repeat, when silver was, taken off the market in, 1965, in the early 70s, there wasn't anybody that wasn't middle class that didn't realize that silver was money and it was a good idea to own some. It was pretty pervasive, and that was part of the reason the Hunts were able to take on and do what they did. And they really didn't corner the market. I'm in that camp. Talk to Jeff Christian, who's probably not as popular with the retail investors as I am, but he's pretty accurate in his outline of what really took place. And a lot of it was that the base had been built. So any new buying of the little bit of silver that remained was pushing the price higher and higher and higher. And this was happening at the same time that inflation was published at 13%. We just entered the Afghanistan war. There was so much uncertainty, not only in the financial markets, but there was uncertainty on the war front. There was uncertainty of the Cold War, and all these things came together as what we call synergistically, where 1 + 2 = 7 instead of 3. And this was compounding. And then someone as strong a personality and maybe foresight, I'm not a fan of his. He sold most of our silver at 92 cents the ounce, but Paul Volcker stood up and said, interest rates at 20%. And I would have sold my gold at the time he, very earlier than that. Maybe I would have picked the top. I'm probably digressing, but the point was, I thought, being overeducated, that going to that kind of interest rate was mafia money. I mean, that's the kind of loan sharking you got on the street if you needed money in a hurry. But for the federal government to come out with those kind of interest rates, this was the end. Remember, an interest rate's a function of return, but it's also a function of risk. And we're saying we have so much risk in the market, I've got to go to 20%. So I'm not willing to take that risk. The federal government, it's lost its mind. Well, I couldn't have been more wrong. The best place to have taken your gold was to buy the long bond, and had the best bull market in any asset class I know of on a risk-adjusted basis for 35 years. I mean, what could have been better than that? I mean, if I had my little hoard of gold in the futures market back then, put into the bond market when I was whatever I was in my 20s, till now, would have been kind of a just go to sleep at night, just keep making money. But what kind of money? Well, fiat money. But hey, it pays the bills, it buys houses, it buys you a new car, puts you on vacations. I mean, I have to be truthful here. But I think that the bond market is the best place to be away from now. I mean, everything goes in cycles, and the trust in sovereign wealth, government issued debt is starting to be questioned more and more, almost on a daily basis. And I know, Justin, you're well aware of that fact.
I think it's actually a wide open business opportunity to revive silver in the popular imagination. It probably wouldn't even take licenses with popular brands, especially with how social media has proliferated. You can go straight to influencers and come up with silver coins, limited mintage of their image or of their ideas, their art, for instance. Furthermore, another potential path you mentioned, of course, crypto backed by gold and silver. And that is an industry, although a burgeoning one, a nascent, very nascent industry from my understanding. Another option might be with this new NFT craze. You could create an NFT that is backed by a silver coin. And the mechanics behind that and the business model could be fleshed out from there. But I do think that there is an opportunity there. And I think that the younger generation would be really into something like that, but you got to figure out what they're interested in and basically slap that on a silver coin. So in conclusion, I'm curious, how do we foster a renaissance, and what role does honest money and silver play in that?
Well, Justin, as you know, if you've ever listened to a few of my podcasts, I usually, but not always, sign off with there's nothing more powerful than the truth. The truth is all fiat fails. The truth is that silver's been proven in the past to be the best asset you could own during financial uncertainty when it's in an inflationary environment. And lastly, that honesty is the best policy throughout our lives, no matter what the realm, be it monetary, be it socially, be it with your partner, business partner, or romantic partner, or whatever. And this is a basis of actually a happy life, is by being so solid in your head and heart and being one with yourself, or knowing what it means to be human and acting in the most, let's say, higher consciousness, or let me reframe that and say in a very conscious level throughout your life, is the means to achieve what we all achieve. And that is the human experience in our best way. We're human. We fail, we lie, we cheat, we do what we do, but overall, on balance, most humans are primarily good. And because it's primarily good, we can get gooder. I know gooder isn't a word. My meaning is that we continue to get better, that we strive to be of maximum use or maximum service to others. The highest state for a human being is to be of maximum service to others. And I've chosen the path of money because money transcends everything. It transcends religion, it transcends national origin, it transcends military objectives. Everybody's concerned about their money, no matter what their currency is, wherever they are jurisdiction-wise. And the reason is that it represents a stability in a very unstable situation, life itself. And because of that perceived stability, people seek it because if they have enough of it, in theory, it provides them with security or some means of not worrying, and to lessen the burden of the human experience, that I have something I can count on. Well, you can count on the fact that all fiat fails, and you can count on the fact that silver and gold have proven in thousands of years to give you some greater availability to choice and moving forward, maybe moving out of a country that's at war, maybe getting food when others couldn't, but it's not an answer in and of itself. And I want to be very clear on that. And the greatest asset you can have in the human experience is your ability to be able to adapt, adjust, and modify your situation, and to not deny the situation at hand, and to take the appropriate action, regardless of how harsh the conditions may be. So I think, Justin, I hope I summarized that and answered your question sufficiently. These are not easy answers, and it's extremely trying times. And from my head and my heart, I want all of your viewers to know that the best thing they can do is free, and that is to encourage others to look them in the eye and to take that extra second or two to make sure that they know that you know that they're there and they mean something.
We've had the distinct honor to speak today with David Morgan, founder of the Morgan Report. Thank you so much, David, for sitting down with us today. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening.